in Virginia, coming out of history.com. The first enslaved Africans arrived in Jamestown, setting the stage for slavery in North America. Now, this transatlantic slave trade, if you're a melanated or so-called Black person in America, then someone have convinced you that this is your history and your truth. Growing up as a youth through the education system in society, we were always taught that we were stripped of our language, our culture, even our home. And we don't have a history. And if we do, our history starts with slavery. Where does this story come from? Well, one of these is the story of Virginia. On August the 20th, 1619, 20-odd Angolians kidnapped by Portuguese arrived in the British colony of Virginia, and then bought by the colonists, arrival of enslaved Africans to the New World, and marked the beginning of 2.5 centuries of slavery in America. Well, that brings us to the 1619 Project, a story, as we know, we are always updated through the generations on the slave narrative. Notice I said narrative because there were a lot of narratives created around this here to make this a reality. New York Times, the 1619 Project and the long battle over U.S. history. And it goes into this project that was created. Now they had something where they came out and then African studies being dropped, African American studies. They have all these things coming out now, and so the story and the validation of this was at stake. So they came with a project called the 1619 Project. This project was developed by Nicole Jones, Hannah Jones. She was a writer from the New York Times. And 1619 Project was launched August 2019 to commemorate the 400-year anniversary and arrival of the first Africans in the British colony of Virginia. Let's walk. So here in the book, First Enslaved Africans, Project 1619, and this is coming from, so it speaks about Isabella, and it brings validity. It tells you about the Spanish ships, such as San Batista, loading 350 Africans in the middle of May 1619. Okay, it goes, and they'll go out to present-day Veracruz. 2 English ships were, the story goes, 2 English ships were attacked by Spanish ships, Juan Batista. They ended up taking 60 of the healthiest Africans. A sister by the name of Isabella was put on the White Lion. Okay. Angelo was put on the Treasure, and both of these ships traced back to Virginia. When we go to the book by Nicole Hannah Jones, 1619 Project, A New Origin, on page 2, August 1619, she speaks about the arrival of the 20 Africans that arrived. The boat, the White Lion. The White Lion, carrying a man-made fate, makes landfall while Virginia begins its system of land grants, white indentured service by bestowing the property. They stolen from the stolen name unfree transatlantic labor. Okay. Now this sister won a, right here, Hollywood Reporter, Nicole Hannah Jones condemned state whitewashing history at the NAACP Image Awards. So the creator of the 1619 Project was honored with the Social Justice Impact Award presented to her by actor Kerry Washington. Okay. Those who are in the vanguard of process need a passion for truth, said Washington, introducing the Pulitzer Prize winner. She praised Hannah Jones for defending the uplifting of our history and the spectacular truth of our story on this shared land. We're going to see the NAACP get behind this project. She speaks about it. It started off as a idea, and then it grew into something, and later they're going to put the funding behind it and create this whole project. I mean, it's made it all the way into the presidential elections. We even heard politicians, a lot of backing by the government to create this narrative. Well, you have a side on the other side who's erasing this and saying that this has been a problem in history. The 1619 project, as of now, some 36 states have passed or considered bills to make it harder to teach about racism and inequality. Politicians are using the power of state to whitewash an already whitewashed history. Books and ideas of the Black experience about the LGBT community are being banned. The anti-history laws go hand in hand with the regressive policies that aim to restrict our civil and voting rights. A healthy society does not ban ideas and attacks on books or an attack on our democracy. As we see this, the Pan-Africans are in bed with the LBGGs. Well, this company that they speak about that brought over them to the Virginia would be the Virginia Company of London, which was a joint stock company chartered by King James I in 1606 to establish a colony in North America. Now, these people are saying that they're whitewashing a history, and they're starting our history off with slavery. And they bring it to us as though white people are responsible for this. But tonight we're going to show that this was actually melanated or so-called Black people who orchestrated this. And you can call the white, and they blackwashed. I mean, they're in the whitewashing, like she said, whitewashing the history that has already been whitewashed. When we come to Lee Cummings, the Negro Question, Part 6, the 13 colonies, right here, image located in the New College Library, Edinburgh, UK, which is a depiction of the melanated or so-called Black King James. I know that this image of Black King James can be a little confusing because the Western education about this is the truth that is known by rich and elite in the world. That was a person, part of English history and professor before I got into the bowels of this book. King James comes from a long line of Black Scottish kings. The Stuarts not only ruled Scotland, but they ruled France, Spain, Ireland, England, Britain, and Wales. Shout out to the sister Sweetfeather. Right here we have image 267 of Records of the Virginia Company, 1606 to 1626, volume 3, miscellaneous records, Records of Virginia Company, 1606, from the Library of Congress. So they spoke of 20 Angolians coming over, but as we get down here, about the later end of August, a Dutch man of war and the burden of 116 tons arrived at Point Comfort. The commando named Captain Joke, his pilot from the West Indies, an Englishman, determined the concert ship. Okay, the governor of the Cape Merchant, he brought not only thing, but 20 and odd Negroes. So we want to circle this because someone has came back in history, and this modern history is teaching us, and this is actually coming from the Virginia Company records. Okay, and 1606, 1626, and now in modern day, as in the 60s going in the 70s, they changed Negro and they replaced the word Negro with Black throughout all of the literature. Well, later they came and replaced the word African. Okay, because when we go into the original records, it's always stated that 20 odd Negroes came. Now let's talk about the Virginia Company of London. The Virginia Company of London was a period, the colonial, and this comes from Colonial Americas at Work by Herbert Applebaum. The colonial period was a singular era of indentured servant in America. Galson estimates 300 to 400 servants migrated to the colonies out of a total migration of 600,000 between 1650 and 1780. Most migrants went to the West Indies. Chesapeake, New England received 2% until they lost the charter in 1624. Most colonists at Jamestown were servants at the Virginia Company of London. Now, the treatment of indentured servants have been a subject of debate and discussion. If runaways are indicated then treated was bad in the 18th century, there were newspaper ads describing runaways sought by masters. Now, they teach it in history that if you heard that in history, then it will be associated with African, but actually it's associated with an indentured servant or one of these between 300 and 16,000, 100,000 immigrants that came over as indentured servants. Now, laws permitted punishment in those who broke the indentures by leaving, including whipping, and more seriously, adding more time to the term of servitude. And right here we have coming out of the College of William and Mary by Frederick Schitz, British Convicts Labor Colonial Virginia. At the first, landed reporters relied on importation of white bondsmen from their mother country of England and continent were combed for servants to be sent to America. Okay. Now, the Cromwellian quest of Ireland in the middle 17th made slaves as well as subjects as Irish people. Over 100,000 men and women, children were seized by English troops and sent over to the West Indies, where they were sold into slavery on the tobacco plantation. This is European history. Here we have bound to servitude coming from the National Archives of a record of a guy who speaks about his journey here through this trade. There were all ages, male, female, adult, child, transversed through the ships of Mary, Gold, Southampton, Abigail, and George. Okay, the conditions on the England merchants bordered inhumane. Okay, competing with the common infestation of rat sickness fueled by fetid water, rancid food, rabid passages, the combined odors of human waste and blights from a form of concoction that assimilated the sense of all on board. I'm sorry. So he speaks about this, and this brother's name is Gottlieb Milkberg. Okay, in 1750. Now that'll bring us here. Okay, when we take a look here in the colony of Virginia, we can see all of these indigenous nations here. Okay, well, we go to the transatlantic slave trade. Shout out to the homie Swordfish, BCU Atlanta. He taught me this move right here. And so when we go to the database, and we're looking out of the range between 1619 to the 1660s. You're gonna have your first slave laws come down in Virginia. But we want to look in this period that they said they came. Now, in the top 5 rows right here, I'm gonna break them all down to the top 5 rows because this is where Virginia is sitting on the 5th row. So we're gonna go through Upper James River, where they said they came, the York River, as we see 0 people embarked and 0 people disembarked. When we go to the Rappahannock or South Potomac or the Potomac River, the Rappahannock, 0 embarkments, 0 disembarkments. South Pontiac, Upper James again, York River, and Virginia Port, any Virginia port unspecified. Okay, Renoco, we have 0. So this whole story of this 1619 project, 20 odd Negroes and slaves and Angolians and all of this here, when we go to their database, which favors their claim, slave voyages, we find no disembarkment or embarked slaves coming in or out. Okay. What about Hampton? They say, damn, Virginia, you ain't gonna ask about Hampton? The Lower James River, 0. Okay, 0. What really happened? Well, this is the real migrations that came over. As we see, they're gonna leave different European migration. The Scots, Irish, the Puritans, the Pilgrims, the Germans, French Huguenots, England, Austria, Netherlands, France, Swiss. We're going to see all of them embark, and they're going to land here on these on the coast of America. More further proof that this story was created when we go to Essays on Progressions of Nations and Civilization, Productivity, Industrial Wealth, and Population by Ezra Seaman, page 581. Dr. Moore says the inhabitants of Virginia were estimated as follows: in 1618 at 600, 1623 at 2,500, 1640 at 20,000, 1660 at 30,000, 1671 at 38,000. Whites and 2,000 blacks in 1681, 14,000. Titleable inhabitants in 1703, 25,000 titleable inhabitants. Professor Tucker says that according to the official communication from the governor, Sir William Berkeley, made in 1671, Sir William Berkeley was the governor. He was a loyalist. He remained loyal to the British. He even allowed King Charles access there after they he was put off the throne. We go to page 581. The population, and this is the governor of Virginia. He says the population of the colony of Virginia was then 40,000, of whom 2,000 were slaves and 6,000 were white indentured servants. That the importation of slaves, listen, this is coming from Berkeley, the governor of Virginia. He said that the importation of slaves did not exceed 2 or 3 cargoes in 7 years. Okay? They did not receive cargoes within estimated cargoes exceeded 2 or 3 cargoes in 7 years. By 2 or 3 in 7 years. Check. This will not fall in line with the narrative that has been put out, especially not the 1619 or any of these other projects that they're putting out. You have to remember the 1619 project also involves John Roof, who's the guy who's said to be Pocahontas' baby daddy, who's gonna die, and his son's gonna come back 27 years later, and they're gonna claim up a lot of property, and this bloodline will hold a prominent or a sovereign position here as the aristocrat society or the elite in the class system that was created throughout Virginia. He also goes on to state that but the servants he estimated at 1,500 annually. Okay, you had only 2 or 3 cargoes in 7 years of a slave, but that the servants he estimated 1,500 annually, that most of whom were who? English, a few Scots, fewer Irish. Okay, so the people, he's saying he's not seeing, out of 7 years, maybe 2, 3 boats came through here and maybe dropped off a slave. But man, we get tons of these Europeans, English, Scots, and Irish. That's coming from the government. When we look through Virginia's colonial soldiers, this is in the colonial era, and we're going to look through the rolls. Okay. Then these rolls, they're going to identify the name, the date of birth, the place of birth, the age, their height, and also the occupation, and most importantly, their origins. So when we look through here and we find that you have Scottish people who are labeled black skin, swarthy complexion. Right here we see a planter in Virginia. He's dark. Shoemaker. We have an Irish, they have a planter. He's born in Ireland. He's dark. These are the tools that we will use. Virginia dark, but you also see the Scots and the Irish also being labeled as dark skinned. Check. You have a few, very, very few fair complected or white complected Scots in them. So what is this story? What really happened? Well, Virginia enslaved the Indians. Coming out of Encyclopedia Virginia, Indian enslavement in Virginia. Indians were enslaved in Virginia by settlers, traders from shortly after the founding of Jamestown until the end of the 18th century. Okay. Now they were required, men and women, to work as servants or in tobacco fields, mostly relied on indentured servants and enslaved Indians. Check.